Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. We'll give it a couple more minutes, or another minute. My clock still says 12:59. Okay. All right, 1 o'clock. Welcome to the safety session of the NCDOT annual meeting. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, HDR, for sponsoring this session. And we're going to try and follow the lead of that previous session in the morning, and I'm going to introduce all three presenters now, and we'll try and save the questions for the end. You can use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll go through those at the end. So our first presentation is an all-way stop as a safety countermeasure, and presenting today is Carrie Simpson. Carrie received her bachelor's degree from Valparaiso University and came down to NC State for her master's. She's a registered professional engineer in North Carolina and has worked within the NCDOT traffic safety unit for over 17 years. She is currently the NCDOT safety evaluation engineer. In this role, she is responsible for managing a team of engineers and evaluating safety and mobility programs and projects across the state that projects across the state that inform project and policy designs. While working for the department, Carrie has authored studies published in the Transportation Research Board and the Journal of Transportation Safety and Security on safety topics such as flashing yellow arrow, dynamic all red extension at traffic lights, at traffic signals, vehicle entering when flashing signs, and always stops in school zone flashers. And presenting alongside Carrie will be David Phipps. David graduated from NC State and is a registered professional engineer. He is the Central Region Field Operations Engineer in NCDOT's Traffic Safety Unit, where he has worked for 22 years. He has worked in the Capital Region Traffic Engineers Office and the Sandhills Region Traffic Engineers Office, and currently works in TMSD headquarters. His experience includes safety and project development, project prioritization, field investigations, and countermeasure recommendations, and management of field investigation contracts. Following that presentation will be a city's Vision Zero program from beginning through implementation in Anchorage, Alaska. With us today is Adrew Ooms. Adrew is a senior engineer with Kittelson in Anchorage, Alaska. He has focused his career on safety and active transportation engineering and planning through Vision Zero safety action plans, local and regional plans, and the production of the Highway Safety Manual. He seeks to raise the bar in data-driven safety analysis on every project. Adrew will be joining Kittelson's Wilmington office in 2021. We're excited to have you in North Carolina, Adrew. And following that presentation, to wrap us up in this safety topic, will be enhancing pedestrian safety in Tega K. David Hooper will be presenting on that topic alongside Bradley Reynolds, and David is the agency administrator for the Rock Hill Fort Mill Area Transportation Study, or also known as RFATS, which is the MPO located south of Charlotte in South Carolina. RFATS serves a planning area population of roughly 255,000. It's the state's only designated air quality maintenance area and is one of the fastest growing regions within the state of South Carolina. David holds a bachelor's degree in political science and communication and a master's degree in public management. David brings nearly 2 decades of experience in planning with a particular focus on land use and transportation planning. And presenting along with David will be Bradley Reynolds. Bradley is the Southeast Traffic ITS Manager at WSP with 17 years of experience in transportation planning, traffic engineering, and traffic operations. Bradley lives in Raleigh and received his bachelor's in civil engineering from NC State and his MBA from, I'm from the north, so I'm going to say Appalachian State University, but I know everyone down here says Appalachian. Bradley specializes in traffic analysis, safety access management, alternative intersections, and active transportation with the goal of improving mobility and safety for all users. In his free time, Bradley enjoys cycling area greenways and hiking with his wife and 2 sons. Well, it sounds like Bradley might be winning the Make It Funner scavenger hunt on the Greenway Trail. So we'll go from there, and Carrie and David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having us. The reason that we're talking with you today about Always Stop is because a lot of what we know or think we know about Always Stop may not have been correct. There's a handful of items we will cover pertaining to Always Stop. We will touch on both safety and mobility and provide some case studies. A lot of the information that is available is rather dated, and there's new information for us to discuss that we think will help aid decision making, especially in rural areas. Historically, Always Stop is something we have not heard a lot about as a safety countermeasure. Just in the last 5 to 10 years, it has become a treatment that safety professionals are talking more about, and we are discovering more about this safety gem. So why is it coming to the forefront now? We are heavily focused on reducing fatal and serious injuries across North Carolina, many of which occur at rural intersections. Part of our effort in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, which is a federally funded safety program, is to develop a strategic highway safety plan. Within this plan, we have aggressive goals to reduce fatalities in our state. In North Carolina, we have 11 emphasis areas with a big focus of the HSIP falling on lane departure, pedestrian safety, and intersections. In 2019, over 30% of fatal crashes in North Carolina were frontal impact crashes, and 2/3 of those occurred in rural areas. When I use the term frontal impact, I'm including a few different crash types, which are predominantly angle and left turning crashes. In 2019, rural frontal impact crashes resulted in over 300 fatalities and 1,100 serious injuries. These crashes are disproportionately severe. The stats show that about 10% of all rural frontal impact crashes result in serious injuries or fatalities. The statistics demonstrate that our rural intersections need to receive additional focus, and they need to be part of our program in a structured and focused way. We feel that Always Stop, when used strategically, can help move us to better meet our goals for reducing fatal and severe injury crashes in North Carolina. NCDOT is in the process of treating candidate intersections that have potential to be good Always Stop locations. We are taking a targeted approach and selecting these sites through an Always Stop initiative. In the 2019 HSIP program, over 3,000 intersections were identified through our intersection warrants based on crash history. This includes a diverse group of locations and many sites that would not be considered for an Always Stop due to volumes and site characteristics. When we look for the characteristics of a rural intersection that may make it feasible for an Always Stop, which would include frontal impact crashes as well as being under certain volume thresholds, we identified about 1,200 intersections statewide. Of those identified, there are about 400 rural intersections that will be part of this initial targeted effort for consideration of an Always Stop based on an engineering study. Many of these sites are being analyzed, investigated, and submitted for funding this year. This map depicts sites that have been funded as safety projects in North Carolina through 2019, prior to the current safety initiative. There had been over 150 Always Stop projects up to that point. With the ongoing Always Stop initiative and our safety programs, we expect this number to be doubled within the next few years. 10 years ago, we performed a safety study analyzing over 50 intersections in North Carolina converted from two-way stop to Always Stop. This research was authored by Dr. Hummer and me and was published in a research journal. The study included a diverse group of four-leg intersections in a mix of environments and with a range of volumes and approach speeds. The overall results indicated a roughly 70% reduction in total crashes, roughly 80% reduction in injury crashes, and a 75% reduction in frontal impact crashes. The higher speed site saw an even greater crash reduction than the lower speed sites, which makes sense assuming greater reductions in speeds entering the intersection. Following up on this work, we used a current set of always stop projects to analyze the impacts on crash severity. We found fatal and severe injury crashes were eliminated after always stop was installed. We found a roughly 75% reduction in Class B and C injury crashes and a 60% reduction in property damage only crashes. This demonstrates the impact that always stop has on all severity of crashes, but that its truest strength is reducing the highest level of injuries. Using the same set of always stop sites, we find a staggering 83-to-1 benefit cost ratio. This is due to the relatively low cost with median installation costs of roughly $20,000 per intersection and the previously mentioned elimination of fatal and severe injury crashes for these sites. In the roughly 100 always stop intersections I've studied through the 2010 paper and this more recent data set, I've never observed a fatal crash after the always stop was installed. There are a handful of safety treatments that we can choose from when treating two-lane minor road stop controlled intersections. The top portion of the slide in green shows the two treatments with the largest crash reduction in small or moderate standard error, which means we are most confident in a big safety improvement. Always stop is the clear winner with a roughly 70% crash reduction. Roundabouts do well with a recent study of rural North Carolina locations showing an over 40% crash reduction, although they come at an average price tag of roughly 40 times that of always stop. The middle portion of the slide in yellow shows treatments with more modest crash reductions and moderate or high standard error, which means we generally see middling and scattered safety results. Vehicle entering with flashing and intersection signing improvements have average crash reductions of 15 to 30%. There are many cases where these treatments aren't good enough at reducing crashes and severity, and we revisit locations for additional improvements. In some cases, we've gotten into an iterative process of treating locations where these solutions don't work well enough. The bottom portion of the slide in peach shows treatments with the lowest crash reduction with moderate or high standard error, which means we are most likely missing the safety target. Stop ahead pavement markings and overhead flashing beacons have shown roughly 10% crash reductions, which may work appropriately as a low-cost systemic treatment applied to a large group of sites, but not for HSIP identified locations with significant crash patterns. The point of this slide is to show other countermeasures do exist to address safety concerns, but they don't measure up to always stop. When comparing the benefit cost of different treatments, none come close. It's a low cost and very effective treatment. We have a lot of confidence that always stop will work in the appropriate situations and work well for safety. The SAFED chart, or the safest feasible intersection design, was produced by Dr. Joe Hummer about a year ago. He overlaid two different pieces of information, which were known crash reduction factors from across the country on what works from a safety point of view at intersections, and a good knowledge of volume thresholds for different types of intersections from highway capacity software and Synchro. It was his idea to overlay the two pieces of information into this one chart. At the top of the chart, the clear winner is the always stop. For two-lane at two-lane roads, the threshold where it seems to be the safest form of intersection control is where major and minor street ADTs are somewhere below about 7,000 vehicles per day. This information gives us a good framework for when to consider always stop. However, we need to keep in mind the decision to install always stop at a specific intersection needs to be based on an engineering study of the location. This slide provides some cleaner volume thresholds to look at where always stop fits from an operational point of view. The bottom part of the slide shows that if your major and minor ADT is less than 4,000, you don't even need to run a capacity analysis. It will work unless there's something crazy out there at your site. The volumes are just not high enough to generate any delay numbers of concern in comparison to the outstanding safety numbers. Above that in the lighter green, up to about 7,500 vehicles per day on the major and minor road, we should probably run a quick capacity analysis. It will probably tell you that an always stop is just fine unless there's something crazy going on at your site. Above 7,500 vehicles per day, always stop could work depending on local conditions for a bit higher volume. However, at some point, always stop gives up. In the range of 10,000 or 15,000 vehicles per day, research shows a roundabout becomes the safest option in that niche. Here are some numbers that Dr. Hummer produced to back that up. These are from the highway capacity software and with some assumptions made of what we would expect to find in North Carolina. This is comparing two-way stop control to always stop control and provides the average delays in seconds per vehicle in the peak hour of the day. If you look down the chart, you can see the pattern is that always stop adds a few seconds of delay to the major street on average, reduces delay on the minor street by a few seconds per vehicle on average, and overall the pattern is that always stop adds a few seconds per vehicle, but never that much additional delay. At the bottom, there's a case where two-way stop gets over capacity and now the always stop operates better. The safety benefits of always stop are so good that a few extra seconds of delay should not be enough to stop us from installing the countermeasure where it otherwise fits. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about unbalanced volumes and what data is available on the topic. The 2009 METCD states that multi-way stop control is used where the volume of traffic on the intersecting roads is approximately equal. The content in this section of the METCD has only seen minor changes since 1971. The information in this section is not based on research conducted since that time. We acknowledge the information provided in the current and past editions of the METCD in this section has been used for many years, but more recent information has been developed at the national level. The more recent research is that of NCHRP 03109, which created proposed METCD criteria for determining appropriate traffic control at unsignalized intersections. I served as a panel member on this research, which was completed in 2015. The criteria were developed to be considered for inclusion in the next version of the METCD, and the research results have been provided to the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices for their consideration. In the always stop criteria that was developed, all language pertaining to unbalanced volumes was removed. One document that is referenced in the report is a study that showed always stop is no less effective when approach volumes are unbalanced as when they're equal on all approaches. This more current research from the NCHRP study will likely change what is provided in the next version of the METCD. I'm going to share with you some information from North Carolina. We have over 140 always stop projects funded by Spot Safety with major and minor road AADT information. When we split the sites by volume share, we find that half of our sites have volumes that are approximately equal. The other half of sites have volumes that would be considered unbalanced. The most unbalanced site in this group had a volume share of 8911, meaning the minor street volume counted for 11% based on the AADTs. This is how that group looks when the minor road ADT on the x-axis and the major road ADT on the y-axis are plotted. The blue dots are those with approximately equal volumes, and the yellow, orange, and red dots are those with progressively more unbalanced volumes. Almost all sites have ADTs that fall below the 7,500 vehicle per day threshold. There are a good mix of major and minor road volume combinations that fall within the optimal volume range. This is a subset of sites that have both volume and before and after crash data available. We use this set of sites to compare crash frequencies for 6 different volume bins that break out the sites by the major road volume and volume share. It's a small sample to pull from, but we can extract some helpful information from it. This is what the crash frequencies look like for the six different volume bins, with average crashes per year shown on the y-axis. The figure shows 2 things. First, intersection volume matters with crashes, so the higher the entering traffic, the more crashes will be present. And this is known to be true regardless of control type. It's the case for any intersection. This data for two-way stop, the before condition, converted to always stop, the after condition, agrees with that. We see more crashes at intersections with higher ADTs. Second, volume balance barely matters for crashes at always stop locations. We average slightly higher crashes at more unbalanced sites, but not by much. The highest average crash frequency was 2 crashes per year after always stop was installed for higher volume and the most unbalanced sites. This is compared to an average of 1.7 crashes per year after always stop was installed for the higher volume and most balanced sites. The ultimate takeaway is that regardless of volume bins, average crashes are reduced after always stop is installed, and the average crash frequency is relatively and comparatively low. The next slides I will present briefly cover a few other items we have frequently received questions on related to always stop. Presence of trucks should not be a reason to exclude always stop as a safety treatment. Locations with a high truck percentage may need a closer inspection. However, always stop does not appear to pose a problem for trucks based on crash data. Always stop can be installed on primary routes without violating driver expectations or creating safety concerns. It has been installed at over 40 intersections with primary routes through the Spot Safety Program. This example intersection, which was installed in 2007, showed an 83% reduction in crashes. As an interim measure, always stop can be installed quickly and can control traffic while arrangements are made for a long-term traffic control. This would be where roundabout, mini roundabout, or traffic signal are justified based on intersection volume, but where there's an immediate safety need that can be addressed by the always stop. An example at left, crashes per year were reduced by about 50% when the two-way stop was converted to always stop. We also have many locations installed for a long duration of time that are still doing well, with roughly 40 locations installed 5 or more years ago that are still in place. On the right is an example that was installed in 2011 and which saw a 79% reduction in crashes. The safety of always stop at 4-leg intersections is well demonstrated. There's likely great potential for 3-leg intersections. However, limited safety data is currently available. This example 3-leg intersection saw a 69% reduction in crashes when always stop was installed. The HSIP initiative is focusing mostly on rural intersections. However, I would be remiss if I did not at least briefly touch on pedestrian considerations. In urban locations, the impacts of pedestrians on always stop operation needs to be considered. Additional study may be needed if pedestrian volumes are high. In locations with heavy pedestrian volumes, there may be conflicts between pedestrians and motor vehicles, and operations may degrade. However, always stop may be a safer option than some other forms of traffic control. More data and research is needed in this area. I found a news article out of Asheville where always stop was installed at an urban intersection a few years back as a pedestrian enhancement to make a crossing safer. The final slide I will cover before handing it over to David provides some images that show the versatility of always stop in the kinds of locations where it has proven to be successful. The first image shows that always stop has been installed at rural intersections that are fairly skewed. The middle image shows always stop has been installed at intersections with turn lanes and with pedestrian facilities such as marked crosswalks and sidewalks leading to the intersection. And the final image is that of a primary route intersecting an SR route where development is present in all quadrants of the intersection. There's a slip lane and there's a T intersection located to the north of the always stop by roughly 200 feet. And with that, I will pass it off to David.
Thank you, Carrie. And I have 2 case studies to go over today. Case study number 1 is NC 55 at NC 111. This is a rural intersection in Wayne County. This intersection is located south of Seven Springs, North Carolina, and just south of the cliffs of the new state park. This is looking north on NC 111 under current conditions as an always stop controlled intersection. There's a good amount of commercial development here, including a gas station, a Family Dollar store, a car lot, and a restaurant. Average daily traffic on NC 55 is 55% of the volume of NC 111 at this location. There's a high percentage of truck traffic. It's interesting to note that when this was under two-way stop control, the stop condition was on NC 111, which is the higher volume road. This intersection was originally identified by the 2010 Highway Safety Improvement Program. A spot safety project to convert it to all-way stop control was developed and submitted in May of 2010. Modifications included changing the lenses to the existing overhead flasher to red on all approaches, installing dual stop-ahead warning flashers on both approaches of NC 55, supplementing the existing shoulder-mounted stop-ahead warning flashers on NC 111 with identical assemblies on the left shoulder, and widening the shoulders at the intersection. So the spot safety project was funded and the all-way stop conversion was completed in May 2011. Here's the before and after data representing 3.92 years in both time periods. The installation of the all-way stop resulted in a total crash reduction from 33 to 7 crashes. Total severity was reduced by 69%, and frontal impact crashes were reduced from 31 to 3. Traffic volumes increased by 25% during the study period to over 9,000 total entering vehicles. And here's the before period collision diagram showing the pattern of angle crashes. The HSIP investigation notes indicate that the primary issue with the angle crashes was failure to yield after stopping. And then here's the after period collision diagram showing this significant reduction in crashes. And case study 2 is NC 72 at SR 1515, which is Union Chapel Road in Robeson County. This is located in a rural area near Pembroke, North Carolina. This view is from 2013 and is looking south towards the intersection. There's a good bit of development here as well, including a gas station, a tire shop, and a small commercial office building. To the east of here is Union Chapel Elementary School, which generates traffic through the intersection during school hours. And this is another image of the intersection from 2013 while it was still under two-way stop control. As a result of an angle crash pattern, a safety project was developed and completed here in 2008. That project installed the overhead flasher that you see. The flasher is actuated on both the main line and the side street. And in addition, a static flashing beacon was installed on the stop signs on both approaches of Union Chapel Road. Additional safety countermeasures in place at that time included stop ahead warning signs, stop ahead pavement markings, and intersection warning signs with 45-mile-per-hour advisories. And this is the crash pattern prior to the flasher installation. 32 total crashes in a little over 5 years, including a fatality. And then here's the crash history after installation of the flasher. In a little over 5 years, there were 30 total crashes. No fatalities occurred during this period, and there were 16 total non-fatal injury crashes. And so as a result of the continuing crash pattern, an additional safety project was developed to convert the intersection to all-way stop control, shown here. And that project was completed in March of 2015. So that project converted the overhead flasher to display red on all approaches, added stop signs, stop ahead signs, and new pavement markings. And so here is the crash data for 3 years after the all-way stop conversion. There were 8 total crashes, including 5 injury collisions. And note that there is a difference here in the time period on this slide from the previous slides. So if we compare the per year crash experience between the two-way stop control, the two-way stop control with actuated flasher, and the all-way stop control, there was only a minor improvement as a result of the flasher project. Comparing the before data to the always stop data reveals significantly better safety performance with a reduction in total crashes, severity, and target crashes per year. And one final note on this location, there was concern expressed by the local community regarding their expected operational performance of the always stop. Following conversion, the intersection operated very well with only minor queuing of 2 to 3 cars at a time during school hours. And that's all I have for the case studies. Carrie, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, this is our final slide. I just wanted to say that the NCDOT Mobility and Safety Division has some always stop resources available on our website. The Safety Evaluation Group has a handful of safety reports and presentations on the topic of always stops. We have also prepared an always stop summary brief, which is a 5-page document summarizing much of what was presented here. And Dr. Hummer's SafeID chart is also available on our website. We just want to say thank you all for listening, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Carrie and David. That was an excellent presentation, and I certainly learned a lot from that. Just a reminder to everyone, put your questions in the question chat, and at the end of the session, we'll go over all the questions. Up next, we've got Andrew, so let's get his session coming up. Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Here's my webcam as well, so I'm ready to go. Yeah, like I said, a hearty good morning to you. The sun is rising over the mountains here in Anchorage, so I know it's a little later in the day there. I was planning on joining the Wilmington office this summer, but it's 2020, so who knows. I look forward to meeting you all next year. So I'm going to give you an overview of Vision Zero and especially how it's applied to Anchorage. Emphasize the data-driven safe systems approach that's core to Vision Zero. Talk about briefly some ways to communicate with decision makers and the public. And what I think is most useful, share some lessons learned, some of the pitfalls we've seen, some good experience we've had elsewhere. So like I said, I'm going to focus on the Municipality of Anchorage project, but pull examples from elsewhere as well. So just to get us into this a little bit, so we'll pause for a moment, think about, do you know someone who's been killed in a crash, severely injured? Have you been walking or biking and have a near miss? Crashes are pervasive and life-changing, but largely we accept that, at least in the general public, as a cost of mobility, at least until it affects us. So that's what Vision Zero is trying to address. So understanding the costs are essential to moving the needle with Vision Zero. Both the physical manifest costs and the emotional costs. As part of this project, we had an Anchorage firefighter tell us that he was tired of picking up dead bodies from the streets, and I can't fathom that being a part of my daily job. What's not talked as much is the financial impact of projects. We often hear it's too expensive to prioritize safety, both in terms of expense and maybe at the cost of mobility. But studies have shown that the cost of crashes is often exceeds the cost of congestion. The key is the crash costs are focused on a smaller number of people and therefore don't always get the public support. Vision Zero is a cultural shift. It's really a lens through which we look at all our transportation efforts and policies. It's not a tagline, but it's a program and process that focuses on eliminating traffic fatalities. It began in Sweden in the 90s, but spread throughout Europe and the US and Canada. The core principles include recognizing that people make mistakes, and the road system and related policies shouldn't be designed so that those mistakes do not result in fatal and severe injuries. One example of this is we acknowledge this when we're designing rural roadways. We've got clear zones and crash-worthy barriers to make make those driver mistakes recoverable and not result in such severe crashes. However, that may be a place we put sidewalks, or we're not putting that same recognition of driver error or pedestrian error when we're designing crosswalks or seeing where people would cross the street. So Vision Zero takes that and that drivers or people make errors, mistakes, and applies it more broadly. A key part is it takes a cross-disciplinary team of stakeholders and the public to address the complex problem. We're talking about changing behavior, changing ingrained design practices, changing priorities, changing funding. So that requires a broad support. It considers all roadway users, but emphasis is on pedestrian and bicycles as vulnerable users. They're typically overrepresented. That's seen throughout the country. What's also fairly universal is speed is essential. It affects crash risk and severity outcome, especially with vulnerable users. And I want to emphasize here, this is not just speeding. This is how the roads are designed and how drivers are responding to that road design. So the approach for Vision Zero is to be data-driven, so based on crash data and systemic factors to target severe crashes. We may trade off some crashes that ruin your week to eliminate those crashes that that change or end your life. One example of that is multi-lane roundabouts. They may not reduce total crashes, but they're dramatically reducing fatal and severe crashes, and therefore Vision Zero is a big fan. I'll talk briefly about the Vision Zero plan. Had several pieces, executive summary, which is excerpted here on the left, which is just showing the publicly approachable crash analysis. So infographics, maps, key factors, and this really established the themes of the action plan. On the right is a one page of the action plan. We had over 50 actions in a 3-year plan spread out by time period. The key focus areas were process and collaboration, looking to build agency support, create a task force, update the policymakers, and create a sustainable funding source for Vision Zero. Another focus area was safer streets for everyone. This included rapid delivery projects to address identified safety issues, as well as longer term changes like changing standards and design policies. Creating safer speeds was also emphasized, including legalizing automated enforcement such as speed cameras, and then promoting a culture of safety, safety campaigns both internal to the agencies as well as externally, and demonstration projects to engage the public, as well as actions such as vulnerable user laws. And lastly, improved data collection and analysis, more transparency, more data-driven approaches. We also prepared a solutions toolbox of ready projects to address safety issues, as well as code assessment. So we looked at the city code and identified areas such as, we don't have a vulnerable user law. There's barriers to automated enforcement. So this was a summary we presented last year on the actions of Vision Zero in the first year of implementation. So we created the plan and the action plan, and then it was actually the state health department that secured a CDC grant for 5 years of implementation. Otherwise, it might have sat on the shelf, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So in subsequent years, we've done an annual report, really tried to work on agency buy-in. We had a roadshow presentation to wide audiences, committees and boards throughout the municipality. We conducted a crossing study on a key arterial and looking to set a systemic approach there. We did a transit survey for mode choice, as well as a demonstration project and a couple more next year. However, I can say, this looks good. We pulled together a nice infographic, but Vision Zero is really yet to take hold for Anchorage. Even in the agencies, and there's there's the usual city versus DOT conflict of priorities, as well as we haven't even had a chance to try broader outreach to the public. So I'm going to use the Anchorage plan and other examples to share lessons learned and key elements of a successful plan, whether or not Anchorage gets there, but we're still working on it. So the key foundation of Vision Zero is a safe systems approach, which is the designing for mistakes and making those mistakes low stakes, if you will. We know there'll always be crashes, but Vision Zero strives to lessen the severity. And that requires all parts of the system to be strengthened, including better manufactured vehicles. SUVs and trucks can't even see pedestrians in front of them and are not designed for pedestrian safety, for instance, as well as improved road design, which is a bit more under our control, policies, and our own behavior as road users. You often hear about the 5 E's: engineering, enforcement, education, engagement, equity. Also, emergency response is sometimes thrown in, but it really is that broad approach with shared responsibility, as there's no one solution. I'm an engineer and planner, so engineering gets my focus, but there's a broad approach that's necessary. So some key elements here. It begins with leadership. You need a champion at the agency level to change focus and practices, break the momentum of we've always done it this way, as well as to allocate funding and set those priorities. It's data-driven and based on the safe systems approach, understanding the trends and being transparent with that data. So the North Carolina statewide Vision Zero dashboard is a good example of sharing that data in a publicly accessible way, tracking it over time, building on that progress. Another focus is roadway design and speed. This requires flexible standards and acknowledging that some areas are, high pedestrian activity or high transit activity and need to be designed differently and have a different feel communicated to drivers. It also prioritizes equity and community education. So nationally, there's a disproportionate impact on traffic deaths on certain populations, vulnerable users, as well as people of color and low-income neighborhoods. So that needs to be baked into the process as well. Leadership, ideally the program should have several layers from the high level where it's a mayor we've seen in some cities, all the way down to the technical leads. Vision Zero can just be lip service for political purposes, or it can really be a sea change in how we approach transportation priorities and funding. A quick example comparison, we were working for a Florida MPO on Vision Zero. They started off their program with a symposium attended by over 150 people across agencies and nonprofits. They have a dedicated Vision Zero coordinator and an ongoing task force. The program is in its first year, but it's already seen significant buy-in, and several cities are in the process of developing action plans with the support of the MPO. As I mentioned, Anchorage is struggling with some of this buy-in and leadership. Here, the mayor kicked off the Vision Zero program with a town hall and advisory committee. However, the Vision Zero program doesn't really have a home. It's not in the MPO, it's not in traffic or a coordinator. And those were some of the first actions in our action plan, and they haven't happened yet. Therefore, the implementation is really challenging, and there's no dedicated funding or person pushing it internally. So therefore, Kittelson as consultants through this grant are the champions, and there's just a barrier there to changing internal agency practice and priorities from the outside. So we set up a core working group with decision makers internally, but the focus has been on building support, not implementing plans. So we're a couple of years in, and we're still trying to get those key champions as opposed to working through the action plan list. Also, Vision Zero's future is likely threatened by the election next year. It's been running through the mayor's office, and the mayor's office is going to change. So hopefully we'll keep things going, but it's far from secure at the moment. I've talked about data-driven a lot, and I'm a data nerd, so try to keep this short. But overall, the approach is critical. It defines the problem to solve. It helps focus investments where they can have the biggest impact, and it's defensible. You can stack up priorities and say this is put numbers to safety treatments, and get those through your business benefit costs, like we saw earlier with always top control. The data analysis focuses on fatal and severe crash trends at specific high crash locations and then extrapolates those same patterns to more expansive systemic issues, such as crossing at bus stops on arterials or looking at downtown traffic speeds. NCDOT's fatal crash reviews and HSIP screening are examples of data-driven analysis like this. So next up is high injury network. This was a key part of the findings of the Anchorage Vision Zero Anchorage plan. The high injury network is essentially a roadmap on where to prioritize investment in order to save lives. This doesn't mean that fatal severe crashes only happen here. Actually, about half of the crashes occurred on the network. But given the network is such a small portion of the city, it's worth prioritizing. For Anchorage here on the right, we considered all crashes by mode, but used a weighting factor. We used the equivalent property damage only method to weight crashes by severity, using local knowledge. And then, so we came with this map and then have validated it in subsequent years. Another key lesson learned here is these roads are mostly controlled by the DOT, and this is a city project, and conveying those priorities or sharing the vision and having actionable plans come out of Vision Zero has been a challenge because of that agency barrier. As a result, we've been focusing on parallel routes to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians as much as possible, but we've got a network that doesn't resemble a grid in many areas, and the transit's on the major routes and so forth. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's already in place that doesn't support high speed through traffic. On the left here, I've got the Charlotte Vision Zero network high injury network that is similar. A note on key data limitations. The challenge with crash data is it comes from police reports, and in Anchorage, actually about half the crashes are from citizens reporting themselves. And those folks have their own focus and challenges. They aren't necessarily thinking about a systemic review later on. For example, in Anchorage, 65% of our pedestrian crashes did not include pedestrian actions. So we didn't know if they were crossing the street or where or how, for instance. So that's a real barrier to systemic analysis. To expand on some of this, we used a variety of sources. We used older but more thorough DOT data that was geocoded. We used newer data from the city. We also even used recent media accounts, assuming that any fatal crash or maybe a severe pedestrian or bicycle crash will be in the news. And actually, a local television station was maintaining a crash map for a while. So we incorporated all available data to us. We also looked at hospital data, and the key element there is our crash data doesn't have demographic information. We wanted to make sure we were capturing that. So we looked at the hospital data. As a result, we discovered that, for instance, for pedestrians, Native Alaskans were heavily or overrepresented, and that was a key area we focused in on going forward. Safer roads, safer speeds. These are pretty essential and pretty universal in Vision Zero actions across the country. But when you have the high injury network and you have a toolbox of countermeasures and specific actions, you can address these systemic problems. So some of the engineering solutions are strategically lowering city speed limits, but lowering speed limits is limited effectiveness on their own, but cities like Seattle have done it citywide, lowered their default speed limits, and that is having an impact. Roadway redesigns to self-enforce desired speed and function, things like narrowing travel lanes, street trees, curbside parking, just general activity helps to communicate to drivers what the purpose of the street is, and it's not for you to drive fast through it. Other treatments such as dedicated pedestrian cycling space, lighting, safety cameras, both red light cameras and automated speed cameras. It's worth talking about enforcement and equity, especially with recent events. This is a whole topic upon itself, but it's worth mentioning here. So the key is to focus on dangerous behaviors, and typically this means drivers, not cyclists or pedestrians, in terms of what's causing the damage. So key is it must be automated. Must be data driven, but automated enforcement goes a long way towards eliminating bias if it's located equitably. Another approach is stings for crosswalks or distracted driving. Here on the right, this is the mayor of Portland being a decoy in a crosswalk sting. And the important message here is we as a city, we as a police force care about these infractions and care about preserving pedestrian right-of-way. So I think that's a pretty powerful message, if as much for the TV and news coverage as the tickets or warnings themselves. Changing gears a little bit to community engagement. It's key because we are looking for drivers and other road users to change their behavior to have a more safe system. So we looked at focus groups and some of the target demographics to try to hone in on this a little bit. I mentioned before, our data showed that Alaska Natives as pedestrians were getting killed on roadways at an alarming rate. So we held a focus group with nonprofit agencies who serve this population and discussed that many ways. And one thing that came up was they come in from rural villages for medical services or other things. And they don't. So there's the barrier in understanding how to navigate the big city. This information can also be used to stop victim blaming and to put drivers on alert. And that's the victim blaming is essential. Part of the demographics we saw, or message we came out of that was, these are not the other. These are citizens. These are community members, and they don't deserve to have what's happening to them. So combating victim blaming is a key action. Another really illuminating approach is we tested our marketing campaign on a focus group. So random road users, and it was pretty eye-opening. So the average person is not passionate about transportation like we are. So here's some quotes directly from those focus group members. I'll just read them here. I speed all the time and I haven't killed anyone, so it's okay. Sometimes I'm not a safe driver. Pretty much I just need to stop trying to multitask behind the wheel. It's just laziness that people don't want to walk to the next block. Bikes should stay on the sidewalk. So these are the roadway users we're depending on to change their behavior for a safer system. So education is going to be a big push. Like I said, I'm inclined to use the engineering stick and communicate that way, but it requires multiple approaches. Outreach campaigns, touching on these. So engagement has little chance of success by scolding, but a few key elements can lead to an effective campaign. So one is humanizing other road users. Talked about this so far, about not victim blaming, about creating that connection, making the risk of momentary distractions and poor decisions clear. European ads are particularly effective. I think they can show more things in their PSA. So they often have visceral slow motion crashes, for instance, to show that life changes in a moment, and our actions are important. And another approach is connecting with the individual. For instance, your family. So here are some of the two most impactful I've seen. On the left, through 6 questions, Nevada Zero Fatalities has really honed in on the humanity of the statistics, and I believe North Carolina Vision Zero did a similar video effort. And on the right, I'd encourage you to Google this one, but just tying our personal choices back to our family and the impact of crashes. Also want to touch on crashes versus accident. Accidents are oopsies, they're unavoidable, whereas crash is a more neutral term. Plane crashes, we try to get to the bottom of them, and there's an official, NTSB does detailed analysis and all that, but we see car accidents as a cost of doing business, if you will. So I encourage you all to use the word crash. There's actually a statement you can sign on to at crash.accident.com. The phrase traffic violence is also gaining traction to convey the true impacts of crashes. There's hope though. Zero is possible. So there's some exciting news out of Europe this past year. Both Helsinki and Oslo had 0 pedestrian deaths. Oslo had only 1 vehicle fatality, and that's a result of many years, but of dedicated multimodal data-driven approaches ascribed to Vision Zero. So there's hope. These cities carry more water in Anchorage, as we often have. Well, we're a winter city, we can't do this, and clearly we can, but these are pretty universal actions. In the US, we've unfortunately had some mixed results with Vision Zero. These are some 5 biggest Vision Zero cities. And while San Francisco and New York have had lots of success, some other cities have not. Overall, there's a lot going on. Pedestrian fatalities are rising as crash rates overall are decreasing. That's activity, that's vehicle dynamics, that's the speed we choose to drive around at. There's lots of impacts there. Even this year with COVID and the change in travel patterns, we're seeing an increase in crash rate, a number of fatalities, even as volumes are generally declined. But some cities are taking now as a great chance to redo their network, both taking parking spaces for open air dining, if you will, but also implementing some of their shovel-ready transportation safety and multimodal projects. That's exciting. If I had to point out what the difference between New York and San Francisco are and the other cities here, New York has had a very active task force. It's been a public mayoral priority, and they've done a lot of streetscape redesigns lately, some of which have been high profile. Though not perfect, they also focused on bicycle stings, for instance, in their enforcement, and that has not been very equitable or data-driven, if I may be so bold. For San Francisco, they've been big on continually monitoring. They've got annual reports and very specific short-term actionable goals that they've seen success. Seattle isn't on the chart, but they've been doing some exciting things there by creating slower multimodal streets and as well as record transportation investment, and seen some good responses there. So those are cities leading the way. Lastly, lessons learned. These are some of the transportation issues we need to deal with in Anchorage. Moose almost using the crosswalk, if you will. But overall, the data is less than perfect, and you need to be aware of its shortcomings and potentially other data sources. One key area is oftentimes bicycle and pedestrian counts are lacking and really make risk assessment difficult, as well as justification of crossings and other treatments. Secondly, vulnerable users are overrepresented, both demographically and modally. And that's a key focus area right out of the gate. That's, like I said, been universal across the National Vision Zero programs. I talked a lot about leadership, but it's so essential to make a sustainable funded program. One way this is enacted for funding is in Fairbanks, we're working up there a lot, and on a long-range transportation plan, we created a high injury network. Then they took that network and put it as a criteria in their TIP, their Transportation Improvement Program funding criteria. Whereas if it's a standard-driven project on the high injury network, it gets extra points for funding. So that's an actionable way that safety can become more of a priority. And lastly, we've seen opposition stop Vision Zero projects or oppose the shift towards safety from mobility, or maybe at the cost of mobility. But a way around that is demonstration projects to get the public support to demonstrate, this bike lane isn't going to ruin your commute, for instance. So those have been effective across the countries. And overall, look at atypical funding sources. The Anchorage plan likely would have sat on the shelf if it wasn't for this CDC grant pursued by state health. So there are partners out there, and making the most of them can make the difference in the plan. So I think we'll have questions at the end. Also, feel free to email me any questions to follow up. I'd be happy to respond. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. We look forward to working with you in North Carolina. That was a great presentation. And up next, we've got Bradley Reynolds and David Hooper. So here we go.
Very good. Bradley, do you want to begin?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us today. We're very excited to present on enhancing pedestrian safety in Tega K. To start out with, we'll just give brief introductions of ourselves, and then I'll turn it back over to David. So to start, my name is Bradley Reynolds. I'm the Southeast Traffic Manager, ITS Manager at WSP. As mentioned earlier, I specialize in analysis, safety, and active transportation, and I enjoy cycling the greenways and hiking with my family.
Everyone, I'm David Hooper. I'm the administrator of the RFATS NPO, which is located just south of Charlotte. And I'm going to kind of jump right in and lay the planning context, if you will, for a lot of the information that Bradley's going to review with you as the presentation moves forward. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the greater Charlotte area, in particular, the city of Tega K, wanted to kind of give you a sense of the larger environment. Tega K is a very nice community that's a part of our planning area. It's fairly well built out, but in those areas that are not built out, it is growing very rapidly. We've got a very robust development environment. In terms of numbers, we're growing at about 50% over the current decade, and that's projected to remain in the double digits over the decades ahead. So you've got planning decisions being made in an environment where the conditions themselves are changing in real time. And so you've got a lot of concern from existing residents of not only the extent of the growth, but how we're going to manage and preserve the existing residents' quality of life during this period of change. Next slide, please, Bradley. Now, one of the unique things about the study area there, and you see up on screen, is Tega K is a peninsula community. You've got one major road in and one way out, and it's a very dynamic corridor as such. So you've got development all along Tega K Drive, both sides. Everyone wants that great lake shot view. And as you might imagine, when people are getting up in the morning or coming home in the evening, they're eager to get back home. And that obviously has implications for the pedestrian environment all along that corridor. Next slide, please, Bradley. Now, this kind of fills in the picture a little bit. Again, this is an area that's based around the water. It's made a prior commitment to having a significant bicycle and pedestrian network, and it's fairly well developed. But again, one of the things we're noticing is that speed levels are increasing. More reports of close calls are being voiced by area residents, and there's a desire to make sure that a lot of the gains that have been realized by these prior investments in infrastructure are not lost as the growth pattern continues. Next slide, please. Now, as we kind of zoom in there on Tega K, we wanted to highlight Heron Harbor Drive. This is kind of a key point that came out of the analysis where we want to try what I'll call the non-traditional placement of pedestrian improvements. And so it's one of the things I want you to listen for as Bradley goes through the data is, this what I'll call this tension between traditional improvement strategies and innovative improvement strategies, and a shift that's occurring in the types of decisions that we're making locally and the basis on which we arrive at those decisions. Because in many cases, getting the go-ahead requires having documentation that will support such an action, and making sure that our partners with the state DOT are comfortable with planning agencies taking a more proactive approach because of the dynamic growth and changing environment within this planning area. One more slide, please, Bradley. Now, I want to just kind of give you a snapshot of what we're talking about here when we talk about these in-road warning lights. You know, we've already got well-marked crosswalks. We have got a lot of signage out there, but we've got some inattentive drivers, or drivers who might push the boundaries a little bit on their way home. And so we wanted to find a way to bring more control to the experience in the area. We also wanted to recognize that it's not just driver behavior that's causing some increased concerns, but also the physical layout. You know, this roadway meanders all the way down from the major urban portion out to the end of the peninsula. And there are lots of trees on both sides of the road. And so one's visibility diminishes and changes. There's also considerable grade changes along the roadway. So you can imagine those who are moving quickly and those other residents who want to get out for a walk with family, getting home from a place of recreation, and trying to bring those two things together where we can ultimately have a safe outcome for everyone. So again, wanted to give you a quick snapshot of the planning context. And what I'd like to do is kind of turn it over now to Bradley and have him walk you through the specific engineering analysis and the study that was completed in support of this effort.
Thank you, David. David gave a great overview of the area, the unique conditions, kind of why this area is being looked at in more detail, even though there are some existing pedestrian measures, crosswalk, signing, shared use paths along the corridor. On this slide, I really want to highlight the 6 focused intersection locations where we were looking at specific pedestrian safety enhancements and crossing treatments along the corridor. And I'll get into each of these in more detail on the following slides. So to give an overview of kind of how we started this study and this process was to understand the existing conditions. And as part of that, we looked at the pedestrian infrastructure, the traffic counts in the area, field observations. We took counts all week long, as well as video observations. We explored the site distance at these locations, crash analysis, collecting available crash history, as well as looking at vehicular speed. Also, as David mentioned, there is topography out here. The roads are not particularly winding, but they do curve, and there also is a grade as you do go down to the waterfront. So some of these locations had approach grades, up to 8%, which can be somewhat significant when you have 7 crosswalks along this corridor in the study area along the major Tega Drive, as well as 8 minor street crosswalks along the side street. So this next map gives a quick view, starting on the left-hand side. That is on the far left is the southern tip of the peninsula, and then going from left to right goes to the northern end of the corridor. But the key here is to really show that there are existing pedestrian and shared use paths. So it may be a little challenging to see, but there is a dashed line on the kind of the southern or eastern side, which is a shared use path, which really runs the entire length of the Tega corridor. And there are crosswalks along the corridor, as mentioned, the major street, 7 total. One of the unique aspects of this study as well is there's golf courses all throughout this community. So there are 3 golf course crossings as well. And on the southern end of the corridor, there are some communities that do not have sidewalk access and do not have crossing access. So, those were looked at as well when we looked into the study. Lighting is along the corridor, but as we'll get into some of the finer details, it's the street and roadway lighting, but it's not necessarily helping in all conditions with illuminating for pedestrian crossings. So the count summary data, I mentioned the counts that were collected. We did go out and collect for an entire week in September of 2019. We looked at both vehicular, ped, bike, and golf cart data. And this image gives a quick snapshot of how we summarized and looked at this for each of the 6 subject intersections. The details aren't very clear on this small image, but the red line, starting really in the upper left, shows your hourly volumes throughout the course of the day. You can see them peaking in the AM and the PM. And then it shows the red and yellow bars. Those are the pedestrian volumes that are crossing Tega K, the major street. And so as we move from left to right and then back left and right again down to the lower right of the screen, you see that that red bar goes down. Well, we're in a peninsula community. Traffic and ADT volumes are going from around 17,000 cars per day all the way down to 800 to 0 at the very end of the corridor. So that red line continues to reduce, but we do see different spikes in crossing volume along the corridor. And those are the things that we were measuring when we got into the analysis to really understand the different types of treatments that were necessary at each crossing location. Quick snapshot of the crash analysis revealed a few things. One is that there's 29 crashes over a 2-year period along this corridor. Only one was a pedestrian crash, and fortunately there were 0 fatalities. But 12 of the 29 were contributing factors of distracted driving. And so that's important for a few reasons as we move into the next slide, which really showed that when we looked at the vehicular speeds along the corridor, the concerning thing is at the northern end of the corridor, and throughout most of the corridor, except at the very southern tip, it's 35-mile-per-hour posting. This is a 4-lane median divided facility for most of the corridor. It does transition down to a 3-lane divided and a 2-lane roadway at the very southern tip. But we know, and most of us, and through Vision Zero and injury types, that as we get above that 40-mile-per-hour threshold, that any pedestrian or a bicycle crash has a much higher likelihood of being a fatality. And with the number of crosswalks, with the amount of pedestrian and bicycle traffic, along with the different parks and communities that are immediately adjacent to the corridor, these high speeds have a very strong likelihood of creating high severity incidences in the future. And so we really wanted to take that to heart in this analysis and really look at pedestrian measures that could help reduce serious injury in the future. So the next step of past existing conditions was moving to the policy review. And we looked at a few things. Federal Highway definitely looked at their resources, NCHRP 562. We looked at the MUTCD for different types of signing and markings that we could include or even enhance. And then, as David mentioned, the effective crosswalk illumination. How can we quantify and also look at locations that would be good for in-road lighting treatment? So the table that we use that's on this page really starts the methodology of looking at the ADTs, which for the most part, all of the ADTs except for one fell into the 9,000 to 15,000 vehicles per day. And then the roadway configuration, where primarily we were at that 4-lane divided. And then also, what our speed was, which was over 35 miles per hour based on the 85th percentile. That helped kind of hone us in on certain types of treatments at these locations. And the next step was using the pedestrian crossing treatments. To most of you, this flow chart will look very familiar. It's based on NCHRP, but also some entry studies in North Carolina, and really help flow through and think about what are our options based on speeds, signalization versus unsignalized, and also delay. And so as we go through this flow chart, we end up with either a no action, consider geometric improvements, consider installing a traffic signal or other types of lighting enhancements, a pedestrian hybrid beacon, as well as any supplemental treatment. So now we're going to transition into the 6 locations and talk about those for a few minutes. This first location is at the northern end of the corridor at the only signalized location in our study area, and it had the highest volumes along Tega K, as well as there is a school in the far right, kind of northeast quadrant, just off the page here. And you know, it also had some of the highest pedestrian crossings as well as bicycle volumes, because children are trying to get to and from school in this area, as well as a park being in the southern or southeast quadrant on the lower pages, lower part of the screen. So our recommendations here were fairly limited, but they did include installing a signal ahead for the northbound traffic, as well as installing a do not block intersection, which we experienced some queuing in the morning for the traffic volumes either going to the school or just in general going, trying to get off of the peninsula. We also said consider implementing LPIs or leading pedestrian intervals at this location. So as we move a little bit more south along the corridor, our next one at Heron Harbor Drive, you know, a few characteristics of here along this location is, you know, we are seeing operating speeds around 40 to 43 miles per hour. The pedestrian volumes are in that 14, 15 range, as well as there's some bicycle volumes and some golf carts are minimal, but still, you know, 4 to 5 per hour. And there's some lighting that does exist. However, it's maybe not exactly adequate or where we would want it to be for both illuminating, you know, for both the northbound and southbound pedestrian movement. So we did include recommendations for providing an enhanced yield line with yield here to pedestrians. Those are shown in the white lines, the white arrows, and then also kind of the shark's teeth going across each of the directions here, north and south. And then this was kind of where we had the either or option for 3 of these locations, which was to either evaluate and improve the lighting at the crosswalks or consider in-roadway lighting with pedestrian detection. And so this, along with 2 other locations, included those types of recommendations. One of the keys that kind of led us through these different locations on the left-hand side of the screen is this flow chart. You know, looking at federal highway guidelines, volumes, classifications of the roadway type, and then going through the flow chart. You know, how much pedestrian volume did we have? What were the speeds? What are our options based on delay, which pedestrian delay was minimal on the corridor, but you know, how does that help get us to solutions? So at 7 Coves Drive and Trail Ridge, the 3rd location down the corridor, again, we were seeing a slight reduction in volume down to 12,000 vehicles per day, but still seeing the 43 mile per hour speed. Here is where we started to see it, like we did at a few other locations, where landscaping and the vegetation were causing some sight distance issues. So at 3 locations, we did recommend to trim or scale back the vegetation to increase or enhance the sight distance, as well as removing and or replacing some of the signage, which could maybe be a little better placed for pedestrian crossing locations. And then again, here we recommended advanced yield lines with yield here to pedestrians, and then the either or option of increasing or enhancing the pedestrian lighting, or considering in roadway warning lights. Our 4th location, Callaway Pines Drive, this is where it started to shift a little bit from where the intersection fell. This was because we ended up with still greater than 35 miles per hour, but our pedestrian pedestrian movements per hour were less than 14. So, you know, it really put us in the considering geometric improvements category. And here we were looking at improving either the lighting conditions or or including the advanced yield lines with yield here to pedestrian signs. So you can see, we took an approach of it doesn't always have to be something super innovative, but let's look at some low-cost measures that can improve safety, enhance visibility for pedestrians, or look at something that may be a little more innovative, such as the in-roadway lighting. And with Windjammer, again, we're starting to see a drop in ADT, but we're still slightly above 9,000 vehicles per day. And here we were seeing the peak hour pedestrian plus the bikes being just over that 14 peds per hour threshold. So here again, we were recommending to include the yield lines with yield here to pedestrian signs. And then it's, again, the in-roadway lighting or improving the lighting at the crosswalk. This one also had some visibility distance issues with vegetation, so we're also recommending to scale some of that back. And then the final location at the southern end of our corridor was at Catamaran. Walking through this one, we had transitioned away from a 4-lane divided to a 3-lane with median on one side and then a 2-lane undivided on the other. We recommended restriping the crosswalk with high visibility paint because it was worn out, and it would improve the visibility for pedestrians crossing and for vehicular traffic. And we wanted to relocate a few signs that weren't necessarily in the right location. And then there was some issues with parking. So going back to how the community uses this with the baseball fields, there was on-street parking that was occurring, which was creating some sight distance issues for vehicles and pedestrians crossing. So we recommended putting in some no parking signage to hopefully alleviate any conflicts moving forward. Also including some ped crossing pavement markings to enhance the driver, let them know that there are more peds crossing at this location. So to wrap up some of our recommendations, we did have a few additional ones along the corridor. One was at the crosswalk on Shoreline Parkway, and going back to the very northern end of our study, there's a shared use path that runs along the entirety of the eastern corridor, and it crosses over to get to the school on Shoreline Drive. And so we recommended some supplemental signage to enhance that shared use crosswalk that goes to and from the school. We also included some recommendations for a mid-block crossing on Tega K, where there weren't any for a few of the communities that were in the kind of the southern end of the corridor, as well as potentially considering some increase in sidewalk connectivity for those respective communities. And then last but not least, the pilot study location. We ended up following at Heron Harbor and Heron Harbor Drive for recommending the pilot study location. And this was for a couple of reasons. It was in a location where we were not concerned about the sight distance. Also, it seemed to just it fit best within the corridor from a grade perspective from the windy roads. And at the end of the day, it just seemed like this was I won't say safest, but the most appropriate to test a new location like this. And so I guess the question may be, why consider this type of treatment anyways? And as David mentioned earlier, we really wanted to consider the community feedback, the potential close calls, as well as coordination with NCDOT to look at some proactive measures that we felt like could not only enhance this community and safety for the pedestrians, but to help for NCDOT and even planning for transportation improvements in the future when it comes to supporting safety initiatives and having a way to help quantify the benefits of these. So with this location, we would be looking at doing a before and after study. And depending on the success of that before and after study, either looking at expanding in-roadway lighting along this corridor or looking at other locations as appropriate across the state. And with that, I will turn it back over to David.
All right, Bradley. Just wanted to emphasize a couple of points here. When you're making planning decisions for an area that's really changing in real time, it requires a willingness to go out there and try things that at first glance are innovative. They're things that our partners at state DOTs may not be inherently comfortable with. And I'd certainly like to extend a thanks to NCDOT to be willing to look at this option seriously. You know, to give you a quick point of reference, the only other place until we did this where this was endorsed by NCDOT was down in Charleston. You had much higher pedestrian activity levels, overall volume levels, and accident levels. And we said we'd like to take that kind of a treatment that's generally viewed as appropriate in another place, and we'd like to consider it here where the volumes are lower, but we've got a physical layout where it might be supportive. And they came back and they were willing to provide their support conditioned on a comprehensive study and a pilot project approach with the understanding that there would be that follow-up study. And we certainly understand and respect that, because we know that it's not just in the city of Tega, that if it shows itself to be valuable, there will be other jurisdictions that will seek this. And we would be setting a precedent. And so it's therefore understandable that when it comes to safety planning, where I think people want to be proactive, for the DOT to effectively manage this and have some reasonable standards for its implementation, we needed to go ahead and pursue this approach. And so far it's worked well, and we will continue to look for those after effect outcomes in the months ahead. With that, I'll go ahead and stop and see if we can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Bradley and David. That was a very interesting project you guys worked on. So before we jump right into questions, I know we've got a couple in the chat box that we should be able to answer quickly, and we've got a couple minutes. I just want to again give a shout out to HDR for sponsoring the event and remind everyone about the silent auction. You should have received a link in an email for that. And to go outside for the Greenway scavenger hunt, don't forget to participate. You got to beat Bradley. He's the Greenway champion. And don't forget about the funner activity tonight. I believe there's a couple options of Pictionary, trivia, and music bingo. So let's jump right into questions. So we got a couple in the chat. And I think most of them so far have been about the always stop. So the first one, and I'll just read it out loud so that everyone can hear it. I'm not sure if the audience can see the chat. But how does this research and guidance relate to local residential streets within neighborhoods? Does it suggest that all intersections within my neighborhood should be always stop control? It seems that could create concerns with compliance and driver behavior. I guess Carrie and David, any answer on that?
Well, the main purpose behind the presentation and our Always Stop initiative is tackling Vision Zero. It's tackling there's 30% of our fatal crashes that are frontal impacts, and most of them are in rural intersections. So that's really the focus of our study. We were not looking at speed management or suburban areas when we were doing the study. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, David.
No, Carrie, I think that covers it. We're responding to the crash patterns that we see as a safety countermeasure, and those are primarily, as Carrie said, in rural areas. We're not doing, recommending these as speed control in subdivisions and things like that.
Okay, and we've got another one for you too. Have there been any studies whether drivers on the main streets take heed for vehicles entering intersection warnings? Or that might be for anyone, but that definitely came in after your presentation. But if any of the Vision Zeros want to hop in.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the question, like whether vehicle entering when flashing signs are effective, if that's what they're asking.
I believe that's the question. Have there been studies that are determining if that has been effective?
Yeah, we've had published research from North Carolina looking at quite a few sites that had that configuration, and we did find that they're effective. I think in the presentation I had said that in general there's a 15 to 30% reduction in crashes where the vehicle entering when flashing has been implemented.
Excellent. Why should or should not an agency prioritize Vision Zero implementation steps on facilities not within their responsibility? Example, DOT road and a city plan. So that one came in. Yep, you got it.
Oh, go ahead. Thanks for your question, Andrew. I mean, the short answer is that's where the data sent us. Obviously, there are implementation challenges, and the city funding a project on a DOT road is a challenge. The approach we took is, we sat down with the DOT safety folks several times. We got on the same page. We have the same priorities, but it's a second institutional momentum and standards to try to steer the ship a little bit. Longer term, they're starting to hand over some projects, or excuse me, some roadways from the state to the city. But yeah, we identified it as a major challenge, and honestly don't really have a great solution.
Okay, and Carrie and David, we've got another question. I know we're about out of time, but there's just 2 more questions, and I think we can go over a couple minutes and take care of them. So Carrie and David, has NCDOT considered utilizing mini roundabouts as an in-between solution to always stop control and single lane roundabouts? They could be very good intermediate or interim solutions that require minimum to no proposed right-of-way and might benefit from a separate category on the SAFED chart.
David, do you want to take it first? Yes. Or do you want, okay.
So the mini roundabout is something we're definitely looking at and working to try to implement and take advantage of a lot more. So a lot of advantages to that, where we're working at existing locations where we're trying to retrofit in, and a lot of times the cost of the roundabout can be difficult for our program. So the mini roundabout is going to be a much more lower cost solution, and we think we're going to get some of the same safety benefits. So yeah, we're working on, we're getting some locations funded right now, and we're working to get more of those implemented, and hope to do more of that. Not only as an interim solution, but we think there's locations where that may be a good long-term solution.
I would add that there's a NCDOT research project ongoing right now that's studying the safety impact of mini roundabouts. We only have a few in our state right now, but they're looking all across the U.S. To come up with the crash reduction factors for the mini roundabout. I doubt it would be, if you're a similar volume threshold where an always stop would work, I would go out online and say that I assume the always stop would be the safer solution than the mini roundabout. But yeah, that's definitely something that we're looking more into and may have potential.
Excellent. Looking forward to seeing all the mini roundabouts become a more everyday occurrence. So the last question that we've got, always stop control. The sites considered appeared to have the two-way stop control on the major roadway. Has consideration been given to move the stop signs to the minor street in the long term?
Yeah, so I say that may have been the case on the 2 examples that I went over. Generally, when we're identifying these, it's not usually, I don't think it's generally the case that the stop condition happens to be on the major route. But, with the particular locations we looked at, the crash patterns were so severe, we didn't feel like switching, in the specific one that I was involved in, we didn't feel like just trying to switch the stop control was going to be the appropriate level of response given the crash pattern that we have, knowing that the all-way stop is going to generally fix the pattern. But so yeah, I mean, we're not generally just looking at locations where the stop condition may be on the major route.
Gotcha. All right, well, I think that was all the questions. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to everyone that was in attendance. And I think we can go ahead and end this now. Okay. I'm not sure how to do that.
I think one of us might have to do it. I think I can. All right, I'm gonna end it. So hope to see everybody at game night tonight.